You're listening to The Foundation of Wellness, a refreshing take on diet and lifestyle, with Jessica Dogert, a registered dietitian nutritionist, and Marisa Moon, a primal health coach. Hey everyone, it's me, your host, Marisa Moon. I'm a certified primal health coach, which means I've been trained in holistic health and nutrition from an ancestral perspective. And I like to use what we know about the diet and lifestyle factors of our ancient ancestors to help us make better decisions for our health today. And that's one of the reasons I'm such a fan of our guest on today's episode. But before we get into that, I wanted to invite you to Habits to Thrive. Habits to Thrive is an online wellness summit that's free to enjoy, where I'll be presenting along dozens of other primal health coaches on a variety of topics to help you reach your health goals. I'll be presenting on a brand new topic I'm calling How Anyone Can Achieve Long-Term Results with Intermittent Fasting. And I've developed a brand new framework that I can't wait to share with you so that you can enjoy lifelong benefits from intermittent fasting. And the Habits to Thrive Summit will be airing October 28th through November 4th, and you have to sign up in advance to be able to participate in the summit. So just go ahead to bit.ly/habits to thrive so that you can register for the online summit. And they haven't even really announced it yet. You're probably one of the first ones to even know about it. So you'll notice on the registration page, they say info coming soon for the next summit. That's because it's the second one this year and it's almost ready to announce. So consider yourself lucky. Head over to bit.ly/habits to thrive. That's bit.ly habits to thrive. I can't wait for you to be a part of this exciting experience. See you there. Well, today's episode is with Dr. Stephen Hussey. He was first on our show in episode number 40, where we dove into concepts of his profound book called The Health Evolution: Why Understanding Evolution is the Key to Our Health. Dr. Hussey is a chiropractor and functional medicine practitioner. He attained both his Doctorate of Chiropractic and Master's in Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine from the University of Western States in Portland, Oregon. He is a health coach, speaker, and the author of 2 books on health: The Health Evolution, like I just mentioned, and I love that book, and his ebook called The Heart, Our Most Medically Misunderstood Organ, which we discuss in an upcoming episode. Dr. Hussey has been eating a strict carnivore diet for 6 months now, and he said he feels amazing. A growing number of people are turning to the carnivore diet, which is a meat and or seafood-based diet, an animal products-based diet, to address their mental disorders, joint pain, skin disorders, and most commonly to find resolution with autoimmune disease. Now, the carnivore diet philosophy is based on the precept that humans thrived on primarily animal foods, whereas plant foods were just seen as survival foods. Since it is quite established that plant foods don't provide unique nutrients that we can't obtain from animal foods, and plant foods are higher in toxins that are harmful to humans, carnivore advocates believe that an all-meat, seafood, animal-based diet is the answer to so much of our disease today. Something Dr. Hussey and I did not cover in this discussion is what we mean when we say plant toxins. Well, plants have evolved with mammals over millions of years, and over this time, the plants developed all these defense mechanisms to protect them from harm and allow them to reproduce and to survive. And these chemical defense mechanisms in the plants, remember, plants can't run away and hide or fight back, so their mechanisms are chemically developed inside of their biology. Well, some examples of plant toxins are like lectins, which is a certain category of plant proteins that are inflammatory, like gluten. You probably heard of gluten, right? Well, yeah, that's an inflammatory lectin. And these can trigger an immune response and inflammation in the gut, causing digestive dysfunction. And other plant toxins you may or may not heard of are including oxalates. Those are found in healthy vegetables like spinach and kale, but they can contribute to kidney stones and a variety of symptoms that I'm not really equipped to get into at this time. And lastly, another plant toxin is called phytic acid. Phytic acid is present in the plant so that it can provide nutrients to its offspring when it's growing into a plant, but this phytic acid binds to those nutrients in our body, in our digestive system, blocking us from absorbing things like magnesium and calcium. It could be a big problem, especially if you're eating a lot of those high phytic acid foods. So as you can imagine from these few examples, there are quite a few things that we need to consider about plants, especially seeds, spices, nuts, grains, legumes, most of which are actually seeds, but they can be destructive in some ways depending on the person and the quantity of the food and the preparation. Our ancient ancestors knew this about plants and seeds. They just were more in touch with the way that those ingredients and species worked and how they interacted with the human body. So our ancient ancestors prepared them in a more thoughtful manner, which has totally been long forgotten today. Seeds, for instance, need to be soaked so that the seed is tricked into thinking it will grow into a plant and it will sprout. And when it begins that sprouting process, lots of the enzyme inhibitors are broken down. Lots of the nutrients are released, and a lot of those toxins that I was talking about are also disarmed, especially when we take it to the next step, which is fermentation. Our ancestors often fermented seeds and foods like this because it will be partially digested during fermentation, and in turn, even more nutrients will be available to the human, and toxins will be reduced even further. So now that you've gotten a little more context here on plant toxins and that whole perspective, we should dive into the interview. But I also want to say that on behalf of Dr. Hussey and myself, it's important to state that neither of us support factory farming or industrial farms in any way. We believe that the mass production of livestock and animal-based products is harmful to our health and to the earth and to the animals, and we don't support that. Animal products should be sourced from sustainable farms and purveyors and locally sourced whenever possible. And the price tag of your animal products should not be your deciding factor, but unfortunately too many of us are just looking for the lowest price, which is why factory farms, often called CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, they are so profitable because they can produce a lot of meat in a very small space and sell it at the lowest price, and people are just eating it up, and that's where the trouble is, and we do not support that whatsoever. We believe the source of your animal product should be what drives you to make a purchase. And we dive into the environmental effect of a plant-based diet compared to an animal-based diet in the context of sustainable farms at the end of this episode. I'm really excited to share it with you. Let's talk carnivore. Here we go. Hello, Dr. Hussey. Thanks for being on the show again.
Hello, Marisa. It's good to be here again. This is awesome.
Yes. I said I want you to be a regular, and I mean it. Maybe a few times a year we'll get you in here. You just have too much to share. And cool. I feel like we're friends now.
That's right. Yeah. You're the only podcast host I've met in person.
That's kind of what I was thinking in my head. I was like, we met in person.
Podcast I've been on, yeah.
Well, just so everyone knows what he's talking about, he was one of the speakers at our podcast summit in Chicago this year. We celebrated 50 episodes, and it was such a pleasure because he talked about an evolutionary perspective on heart health, and we also just recorded an episode on that very topic, and I learned so much. Thank you for your time. I don't know which one is going to air first, this episode or the next one. I'm thinking it might be this one, so stay tuned. If that heart health one is not out yet, it'll definitely be out really soon. But today, we're talking about something I've been putting off. I have to be honest. Jessica and I have been a little resistant to the carnivore diet just because we're always telling our listeners, make sure that you have the full spectrum of nutrients. Make sure that you have plenty of plant foods because they work symbiotically with animal foods to help protect us from carcinogens and help, strengthen our microbiome And we know that animal-based foods have more bioavailable nutrients and are some of the most nutrient-dense foods. So I hate when I hear that someone's giving up animal foods. It really just gets on my nerves for several reasons, but mostly because they're trying to do what's best for them and what's right. And ultimately, I feel like it can leave them, nutrient depleted and even sick or brittle or weak or tired and depressed. I've heard all sorts of stories. In fact, we're going to have an ex-vegan on the show soon who is now eating meat again and has her story to share, because I do think it's something to get out there and announce. But you have gone in the complete one end of the spectrum direction with the carnivore diet. You're not eating any plant foods at all. Is that right?
That's right. It's been that way for about 6 months now.
Whoa. So you don't even have like herbs on your steak?
No, I guess there is one thing that I eat that has some spices in it, and it's because it's from U.S. Wellness Meats, and it's their liverwurst. So it's a combination of some meat and some heart and kidney and liver, and they do have some spices in there. But that's probably the only source of plants that I've had in the last 6 months.
Whoa. Well, I think there's 2 places you need to start. You can choose. You got to tell us why you decided to try the carnivore diet yourself and why you've been still doing it for 6 months. And then really what the carnivore diet is. Yeah.
So why I decided to start it. So I was probably like maybe 80-85% animal based before this. And that was kind of the diet that I just, trial and error started or found that worked for me. Because I am type 1 diabetic, and so obviously animal products don't have carbohydrates, and so it was just much easier to control blood sugars. And then if you look at, the work of Weston Price and how he found out that, these populations that had robust health, had lots of sources of fat and animal products in their diet. So I had found that diet that kind of worked for me, but I still was eating some plants. I was eating some greens and some avocados and things like that. And so I decided to try it though, because, I guess I had in my head, just like a lot of people do, that, plants are necessary for health. Vegetables are amazing and all this kind of stuff. And they definitely do have nutrients that are beneficial to us. But I mean, I would, based on the research that I've done now, I would argue that they're not necessary for health. It doesn't mean that people have to restrict plants or not eat plants at all everyone has to achieve a high level of health. Obviously people do that while eating plants. But for some people it's a very important tool. And so, my entire life I've always had excess inflammation. And so that's, I think, a result of a very poor diet when I was a child. I had allergies and asthma, and I used to break out in hives, and I had all these inflammatory conditions. I had IBS as a kid, and I'd gotten rid of those for the most part, but there was always these little things. Like every once in a while I'd get a tiny hive around like my waistline, or I'm still sensitive to cats. I will say was sensitive to cats because I could tolerate them much better because we have 3 cats, and I could tolerate them better. But if they still got into my face or I petted them and touched my eyes, like I would still, have itchy eyes or sneeze or something like that. Or I would wake up, like if they were in the bedroom and before I went to bed, and I would wake up with like a stuffy nose and stuff. And so those were very minor things compared to what I used to have, but it was still there. And so I decided, based on the results, the kind of anecdotal results people were getting as far as inflammation and autoimmunity on the carnivore diet and all the information. And I researched it for like 3 weeks before I did it, because that's just who I am. But I decided to do it. And I'll tell you that I have seen changes. I'd already made great strides in the way I live my life and how the effect of the way I live my life on my health and my blood work and everything. But I saw changes. And so one of the changes that I saw was that I I can cuddle with the cats. They can be in my face. They can
Whoa.
do whatever. I can touch my eyes afterwards, and I'm fine. And that has not been that way since I can remember.
Life, yeah.
Yeah. And I can tell you exactly what it is. I can speculate as to why that is. But the other thing is that I even have like actual data, because ever since when I was a kid we had pets, and then when I went to college, and then after college I had no pets in my life, and so my antibodies for an allergy, the IgE antibodies, were low, and ever since we got the cats, they were elevated again. So usually IgG would tell you if you have an allergy to something, or you're reacting to an allergy to something, or a parasite or something like that. And so for me, it was this allergy. And after 3 months of being on the carnivore diet, that was normal again for the first time. And I'm in touch with the cats all day long. The other thing is that that my GI issues, like, they were obviously way better than they had been, but there was still times when I had some discomfort, and or just like bloating, or just pain or something like that, and I never really knew what it was. I mean, it could have been anything, but this is the first time in my life, 6 months of absolutely no GI symptoms, none whatsoever.
Whoa.
Which is really crazy to me, because I guess I didn't even know what normal felt like.
Yeah.
Despite the high level of health I had before this compared to what it was. These are just things that I finally got rid of, and so that's kind of why I decided to do it. And I'm still in this experiment, and I'm still going.
My gosh! So what kind of food do you eat?
Well, I pretty much eat the same thing every day, so I'll tell you exactly what it is. I only eat 2 meals, so I don't eat breakfast, and then around 12:30 on work days, and it varies on the weekends and stuff. But usually I drink bone broth. And it's just, I cook bones and a shank steak and salt, and that's my bone broth, and there's no spices in it.
You don't even put vegetables in the broth?
No.
Okay.
We don't want the plant compounds.
Okay.
To be a true researcher and experimenter, we have to, eliminate all variables. And then I'll have a can of sardines, and then I will have, I make like a small steak, and I usually put some suet with it, which suet is like the fat from around the kidneys in a cow, and I'll put some of the fat I cook it in with there. So that's what I have for lunch, and then I come home, and in the evenings I'll have some eggs, and I have, what else do I have? Sometimes some bacon, another small steak. I'll usually have an organ meat of some sort, whether it's a liverwurst I was talking about, or just straight liver. Sometimes I'll eat some salmon roe, which is like salmon caviar. It's expensive, so I don't eat that all the time. And yeah, I think that's pretty much what I eat most days. Yeah, sometimes I'll mix it up, and I'll have like chicken or pork instead of the steak or something like that. But usually I stick to red meat. That's what I eat.
Wow. Is it good for you to have the same thing every day?
I think so. I think that it's fine, as long as you're getting all the nutrients you need. And so that was another thing for me, is that I was thinking, I need to get these antioxidants from plants, or I need to get certain minerals from plants and these things. And when I really dove into all this, I realized that I don't think it's absolutely necessary to achieve health. I don't think you need antioxidants, exogenous antioxidants. I think that your body is designed to make all the antioxidants it needs if we give it the right things. And so a very important caveat here is that in my bone broth and and on my food, I'm sprinkling like collagen protein, because glycine, which is the amino acid found in high amounts in collagen is like the connective tissue, drives the production of glutathione, which is our main antioxidant in our body. And so we need to have that good ratio between methionine and glycine. And so it's also very important to illustrate that, when people think carnivore, like, oh, great, I can just eat a bunch of meat. And yeah, technically you can, but I think that there is protein is not bad for us. Protein is not bad for our kidneys. It doesn't, cause cancer or any of that kind of stuff. But you can do too much protein. And so I really focus on the fat. I eat fattier meats, and I add a lot of fat. I cook with the fat, and I eat the suet, and like I said, the salmon roe and stuff like that. So I put an emphasis on fat because that does a couple things for me. One, it fuels my body, and I feel amazing as far as energy goes. But also, it has no fat has no stimulation of blood sugar. It doesn't increase blood sugar at all. So for me, as type 1 diabetic, it makes things super easy to regulate. Whereas protein has a small stimulation of insulin, or it would in a normal person. So it would raise blood sugar a little bit. So that's been useful. So you kind of have to play with it a little bit. And so that's the kind of advantages that I've seen with that and how I do it.
And I want to emphasize that you're eating sardines, which often in a can, I'm sure the kinds you are eating have the bones that are edible and the skins on them. And those also provide nutrients that you need in a well-rounded carnivore diet, because from the bones, just like your bone broth, you're going to get all of these things that balance out, the muscle proteins. And a lot of people think carnivore is just eating ribeyes and sirloin steaks all day long, but I don't think that would be an optimal diet, especially with high heat cooking or long-term exposure to only those types of amino acids or nutrients. So I like hearing the variety that you have, even though you're eating the same thing every day. What does it do to your gut microbiome? Like if you're limiting your microbiome to exposure to these 5-6 foods, what is going on down there, you think?
Well, I think that the microbiome is it's like the Wild West. I don't think we know exactly everything we should know or need to know about it to draw conclusions. Obviously, there's studies that show that diversity is better. However, people will often say, well, there's no fiber in a carnivore diet. Like, how are you going to feed your microbiome? And the short answer is that your body turns protein into short-chain fatty acids. It doesn't need the fiber to do that. It will do that to the protein, which to me, if you had fiber present, it would just do it with the fiber, and the protein, you could have too much protein because of that. But now if you're using protein for other things you weren't using it before because you don't have the fiber there, then you're using more of that protein. So, getting too much it can be a higher number. There's a higher ceiling, I guess. But yeah, I haven't tested my microbiome. I've done 3 blood tests since I started carnivore. I just did the last one, and but I haven't tested my microbiome. I tested it before, so I would have something to reference it to. But I have seen and talked to seen people posting, and then talked to many people who have done pre and post testing, and they have increased diversity of their microbiome. I can't say that's what happens for everybody. We don't have any studies that show that, but anecdotally we see I guess quote unquote a good thing. But again, I don't think we know enough about the microbiome and how all these interactions take place to know what's good or bad. I think the fact that my GI symptoms are completely gone for the first time in my life is a good indication that good things are happening. And that nothing has manifested itself in a negative way, like a new symptom or something, something I've never had before. So yeah.
Are you eating anything raw? Is that important in a carnivore diet?
I don't think it has to be done, no, but I do know people that try and do everything raw. It's probably a little more bioavailable. But I don't think that it matters that much. I know people do like raw liver because you get, you probably get better nutrients, but you just have to make sure you freeze it for a long time. I don't
like enzymes. I don't know. It's not important to have any living enzymes in your diet, or.
I don't know. Again, that's something that's very. I don't know that we have conclusive evidence. That that's important right now. It's just like people who do all the vegetables and everything raw. I think there's downsides to that too. But I just think that I always look at things from an evolutionary perspective, and if we look at, I think the diet that made us human was a pretty close to a carnivore diet based on archaeological evidence, and not just observational archaeological evidence, but actually testing the stable isotopes of bones of early modern humans and Neanderthals, and their diets were, comparable to high-level carnivores. Mm-hmm. And so that's the diet that kind of drove the success of our species. Not to say they never ate plants, because I'm sure they did. But this research shows that it was very highly carnivorous. And so I always look at things from that perspective. And so if that diet gave us everything we needed to become the most successful species on Earth, then I think that it can suit us well now, potentially. Obviously, people are different, and we've been through some evolution since that time. Some people do better on the diet than others. People are used to the standard American diet they're probably going to have an adaptation phase as far as digestion and metabolism and all this stuff when they do start, if they did start a carnivore diet, or even a change in their diet in any way. So there's always those adaptations, but I do think this diet, it can be a very powerful tool for some people.
Well, the thing that confuses me about carnivore, especially when you just brought up the evolutionary perspective, is, like you said, evolutionarily, humans would not have limited themselves to only animal products, because they would be attracted to any fruit vine that they found, or any edible plants within their nearby vicinities, considering that catching animals, especially larger animals, would be hard without adequate tools. And even if we're talking about those times when it supported the growth of our brain and made us human, there was not necessarily always fire or tools during those times in human history. So why are carnivores so strict and extreme to that they eliminate all plants? Like, why isn't it like I eat a meat-based diet and I have a few plant foods a day?
I think that, well, there's a lot to unpack there. I think that humans, I think that, like, when we first started becoming human, like the genus Homo, when it first appeared from the Australopiths, and then we became Homo, and there was all these different species that led up to modern humans. There was obviously, I think, this transition period where humans were eating plants and animals, but the eating of animals and animal fat and everything is what drove the evolution. And eventually, when we look at the archaeological evidence that shows that early modern humans and Neanderthals, which are, our ancestors that led directly to us, were highly carnivorous. To me, it's obvious that the more carnivorous we became, the more successful we became. And so, but humans still have this amazing adaptation that they can eat plants and survive on them. But the key word is survive. I think that, those foods were eaten in times where, perhaps you had a terrible day hunting, or, like when animal foods weren't available, because obviously that was the preferred food. But, in times where it wasn't available, they could survive on some plant foods until the next animal meal came along. And I guess the argument today is that today we have the choice to have the optimal human food all the time. And if we can make the argument that there's nothing in plants that we can't get in animals, then why risk the plant toxins that we would also get from these plant foods? Why expose yourself to them when you could limit the toxins by eating only animal products? And I'll be the first to tell you that I don't think everybody has to do this to achieve a high level of health. But I guess that's the thinking behind it. I don't, I would never push the diet on anybody, but I just think that for some people, it could be the difference between, an autoimmune disease or a psychiatric condition or something going on with them that they haven't been able to get rid of. And the difference between having that and not. And so I think it's almost like a therapeutic tool. And it's not necessary for everybody to do. But it's even for someone who I felt like I had a very high level of health, it made changes for me.
Yeah.
That I didn't think I would ever get rid of. I thought it was just, who I was going to be and how I was going to be, and it made the differences. So yeah.
If you have a vegetable now, though, is it going to make you like hyper react? Aren't you worried about that?
I don't know, and I wouldn't even say. I mean, it depends on what you mean by hyperreact. Like hyperreact to a plant toxin, or hyperreact to
Yeah, like say a
sugar,
food
or
before,
something.
like some people give up gluten and they feel good, they feel better. But then if they try to make an exception and eat a little bit later, it's like this huge blown out, like crazy reaction that they never had in their life. And I know I
Yeah,
can
but
relate because it happened to me
yeah,
too. And some people are like, well, why would you ever give it up if it's going to be way worse afterwards? And I'm just kind of thinking in that direction for you and anyone on a strict carnivore diet is like, can you have plants again? Or is it going to like ruin
I
you
don't know.
if you
I
have
mean,
them?
I'll tell you that the first plant I'll probably eat again is an avocado, and that's
Good.
really felt pretty benign to me throughout my life. It was one of those foods that I really felt like I never got a reaction from, but we'll see. But I would say that just because just even if I didn't hyperreact to that, or or gluten or whatever, I'd probably never eat gluten again. But even if I did, like, I don't think that's a bad thing that I've created. I mean, that's just my body saying you were never supposed to have this in the first place, and we got used to tolerating it,
Yeah.
and then we got rid of it, and now you're going to see, just like an elimination diet, you see
Mm-hmm.
the foods that were really problematic that your body just got used to tolerating, and so when you
Yeah.
eliminate them and add them back, you realize what damage it really was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that, to
Yeah.
me, that's just information. Elimination is actually just information. So it'll be even more informative when I do start adding plants back in, if I do,
Mm-hmm.
to see what
I,
kind of things were happening.
I totally agree with you about that whole elimination diet comparison, and that's why I wanted to ask you. But I also am concerned if we don't have fiber in our diet when we're carnivore, then the microbiome is changing so much that there aren't the proper bacteria in our gut to break down the plant foods for us, and that's why we're reacting, not necessarily because of the toxins.
Maybe, but again, do we need those bacteria to break down plant foods? If we can eat the optimal human diet all
No.
the time, do we need them? And
Don't you miss
if the
them?
plant, maybe. I mean, I've always done whatever I could for health, including extreme diets. I guess people will call this an extreme diet. Um, and there's definitely a social aspect to food, and I think that that can provide us health as well, as far as being around other people, and connecting with people over food. And so if that's something you miss, and and you you want to partake in some of those things, then that obviously gives you health in some way, but it takes it away in others, because
Mm.
you're participating in these foods. And so for me, I just want the information. So I want to know, like, what is affecting me in a negative way, so that when I am in a situation where maybe I do want to partake in those foods, I know what risk I'm putting to myself.
Yeah.
And so it's really about gathering information for me. And so this first part has been, how's my body going to react on a carnivore diet? And it's done well, very well. And then it's going to be more information when I add that first plant food back in and see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's just kind of how because I know that, sugar and grains and vegetable oils don't do well with me, because I would argue they don't do well for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But I've tested that out. So I know that if I'm going to eat those foods, which I really never do, that I know that I'm going to have this reaction, but I'm prepared for it, and I have that information already. So now it's just going to be about plants in general. Like, what do they do to me?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I want you to touch a little bit about your perspective on the environmental impact of having a diet based on animal foods. But real quickly, before we go into that, can you just tell us anything else that you noticed about your blood work? Anything else that has improved or that on a carnivore diet people are seeing in their blood work? Because a lot of the foods that you mentioned, the average person is being warned about still, that they shouldn't have too much bacon or egg yolks or red meat because it's going to affect their blood cholesterol or whatever. We just covered all of that in our
Yeah.
heart health episode. But Dr. Hussey, I'd love to know what kind of markers you're seeing improve on blood work.
Yeah. Well, for me specifically, my A1C, was already pretty good. It was already, below 7, which, let's say, for a type 1 diabetic, oh, that's great. But with this, being so stable and having very little glucose excursions. It's so easy to control, so it's already gone down. And I think that right now it's like 6.1, but I'm thinking it's going to go even further, because this is kind of a process. It's only been 6 months, so I think next time it'll be lower and lower and lower, which is crazy to me because it was below 7, which is what they tell you to aim for. But to get optimal control like this, it's just going to be awesome. So that's one huge benefit for me.
That's like a marker of your blood sugar resting.
Right. Over a 3-month period.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like the average blood sugar over a 3-month period.
Okay.
Which is very important for me, but it's important for everybody too. Yeah, I mean, it was the IgE antibodies. It was my inflammation did drop. Like my C-reactive protein went lower than it already was. And then the A1C, my cholesterol went super high. Because of what we talked about in the last episode that I did with you about the heart. Just the process of making ketones is going to make more cholesterol, which causes the cholesterol to go higher. And we talked about why that's not a problem on the other episode, so people can reference that one. But I'm what they call a lean mass hyperresponder. So that happened for me, and that could happen on a ketogenic diet too, not just a carnivore one. And so mine shot way up, but my other markers, insulin resistance, inflammation, HDL, triglycerides, all are right where they need to be. And so then LDL is not a problem. But yeah, mine's like, my total cholesterol is like over 400, and my LDL I think is over 300. Yeah. So it's really high. I mean, that's like super high.
Yeah.
And I'm not concerned about it at all because like cholesterol has so many beneficial things, but one of them is that what you'll hear from lean mass hyperresponders is they never get sick. And so one of the things cholesterol does is it binds bacteria, so it prevents you from getting some bacterial infection because it binds the bacteria before it can become anything. And so just like 3 weeks ago, I felt like my throat was getting sore. And I kind of felt that thing in my ear, and for one day, and then woke up the next day, nothing. It was like it was happening, and then it didn't. I haven't really been sick. I've had that happen a few times over the last 3 years, but the last time I was like really sick was like January 2016, and so I attribute that to me being having this cholesterol number that's higher and binding up these things. And the other thing I saw is that white blood cells went down. Not like that they went down to the below normal range, but they went down because they're not needed as much when I have this cholesterol binding up bacteria. I don't need white blood cells to be fighting them off. My theory, anyways.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I think a great way to wrap up is to address the impact that animals have on the planet, because I'm with you, Dr. Hussey. I source our meat from regenerative farmers who are raising animals on pasture in a way that mimics the patterns of herding animals or grazing animals in the past. And that's important for the earth because it helps to sequester carbon, which is something that keeps our greenhouse gases to a minimum. And so there's a lot of misconceptions there, and people are eliminating meat. Schools are going meat-free on Mondays. Everybody's like, hey, let's do like meat-free Mondays, and they think they're doing something good for the planet and for the children. But ultimately, we've been just blindsided by, false claims and blown out, accusations, and it's confusing. And I know we could spend a whole nother half hour on this, but if you could summarize it for us, your beliefs and what you've learned.
Yeah. So first off, to start off, like everybody talks about greenhouse gas emissions, and the contributing to global warming and all that kind of stuff. And if we look at numbers from the FAO and the EPA, they estimate that agriculture, all of agriculture, plant and animal agriculture, contributes about 9% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And plant agriculture takes up about 5% of that, which would leave 4% for animal agriculture. So in reality, plant agriculture is contributing more to greenhouse gases than animal agriculture. And I think that cattle, they estimate, is about 2%. Okay, so given the fact that, energy production and transportation account for about 30% each, our efforts should go to those things much more than the 2% that is cattle farming.
Yeah.
So
we should have carpool Mondays, not meatless Mondays.
Exactly. So there's that aspect of things. But then the other aspect you touched on is the fact that when we look at farming plants, it destroys the soil. And the example I like to give is look at where the birth of civilization happened in Mesopotamia and then, thousands of years later in Egypt. What is left of those places? They're complete deserts because they farmed on those soils and they did not, do so in a sustainable way. And I think that we would see the same thing today in what is the Corn Belt of America if it were not for chemical fertilizers. Mm-hmm. The only reason we can still farm on those soils is because we have chemical fertilizers, which, by the way, come from oil, which is not a very sustainable thing because we're going to run out of that one day, and it puts a lot of toxins into the environment. But just the process of tilling the soil destroys the soil. So we're losing fertile soil by insane amounts. And plant agriculture has no way of putting that back, whereas animal agriculture does. If we properly raise these animals and rotate them on pasture, we can actually sequester carbon back into the soil, which is the problem with greenhouse gases, is carbon gets released into the atmosphere. So we can actually sequester it and have a carbon sink. And so the only salvation for our soil and for greenhouse gases, I think, is the correct way of doing animal agriculture. And if you ever listen to Joel Salatin of Polyface Farms, he has mastered this process, and it is just insane. Like I'm not even trying to repeat what he says and all the statistics he says, because it's just like you listen to it and it's just like, man, I got to listen to that again. Him on podcasts. Like if you listen to what he says and how he's doing things, it's just like clearly this is poetic. The way forward. Yeah, this is what we need to do. And so luckily for me, this is the other aspect of it for me, it's on a personal level. On a carnivore diet, the vast majority of my food, I'd say 75% of my food, comes from Polyface Farm, what I was just talking about, because it's less than an hour from my house. Aww. Okay, so it comes from an hour away, right? So if I wanted to be a vegan and get everything I needed in my diet, I would have to ship food from all over the world to do it, to get everything I needed, because there's just things that I would have to get in that diet that just don't grow here near me, And so I do order some food from U.S. Wellness Meats, and they're based in Missouri, which is still not too far from me. And it's, so that's the other aspect of things, is that I'm getting my food extremely locally and having, less of an impact on the environment because of that. And then the last thing is that I've noticed that I produce way less waste. I don't waste any food. As long as I have a functioning freezer, I don't waste any food. And the barometer for taking out my trash is because it starts to smell really bad, not because it's full, because I just don't create waste, or as much as I used to, when I had plants and other things. And
that's a good point.
Yeah. So on a personal level, I noticed those benefits as well. And so to me, it's incredibly sustainable for all those reasons.
Yeah. I mean, even for our health and for the world, one of the biggest arguments is that there won't be enough meat to help people all around the world get adequate nutrients. But we also can't have a world that's based only on plants, because I don't know if it's 2/3 of the land on this earth are not suitable for agriculture, like for plant growth, because the types of terrain that it is. So livestock are perfect for that. There are lots of impoverished countries that have to rely on livestock for their livelihood and for sources of nutrients. And they have grazing animals on mountains and rocky hillsides and places where we couldn't be farming plants. So there are just so many things to learn about this. I'd like to provide some resources for you all in the show notes, and you can always find those at tinyurl.com/FOW home. You'll see all the show notes for this episode. Dr. Hussey is going to give us a link for where he buys his meat, and I'm going to give you a link where I buy mine in the Midwest. And we're going to provide you with some resources to learn more about this topic. I think it's really important before you make these big moves for your family, just because the media headlines is telling us that we should eat less meat. It's incredible how much false information that is built upon, and you owe it to yourself and to your family to do the research and see both sides. I will reach out to you for those resources so that everyone can have them, Dr. Hussey. So anything you want to share, please send it over. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to keep this one short, but by all means, any more carnivore information you want me to share, we'll put that in the resources as well. And good luck to you. I can't wait to find out how long you stay on the carnivore diet, because now it's already been 6 months. And tell me when you eat that avocado. I gotta know.
I will do it. I will let you know.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And everyone can find Dr. Hussey at resourceyourhealth.com and Dr. Stephen Hussey on Instagram. That's Dr. Stephen Hussey. And again, thank you so much. You're the best.
Thanks for having me. It's a blast.
You're welcome. Bye.